Hey everyone, Stephen from 40 Plus BJJ here. What I wanted to talk about today is the whole debate and the framing of the debate around how hard you should be rolling, okay? Rolling hard versus what's often referred to as flow rolling. And just to pull back the frame a little bit, really what I see is a mass delusion in the jiu-jitsu community. And you see it in this group, and this is not casting aspersions on anybody or no judgment, because I've 100% been part of this, implicated in different stages of this myself. But since I started 40 Plus BJJ back in 2011, I've really been trying to reconcile these things, steer away from it. But what I mean is, you see in this group, and countless messages, emails, things I've gotten from 40 plus subscribers over the years from all over the world, all different stages, from not just white belts and blue belts, but all the way through to people who are black belts, is this sort of recurring theme about suck it up. You've got, this joint pain, this inflammation, joking about, all the things we see, which are funny, like arthritis top team and ibuprofen top team and things like that. And the thing is, it becomes like cauliflower ear in a sense, where people start to take on the sister dynamic of poor recovery, overtraining, inflammation, pain, and injury, essentially as a badge of honor, right? It starts to become a signifier of your sweat effort, just like cauliflower ear or the fading of the belt color, things like that, right? So there starts to be an identity formed around that. And what you see a lot, even from people who are, intelligent and experienced and things like that, is this sort of ethos of, somebody will come on and talk about how their joints are constantly on fire, and people just start to pile on and say something to the effect of suck it up, buttercup, just push through, train, smash the young guys. That's another thing obviously in this group, is you see these young athletic guys that have gas tanks for days and they're all over me, and any advice, people just smash them, slow them down. Worst of all, like I hear all the time, use your grips, old man strength, and then they complain about why their fingers, elbows, wrists, and forearms are constantly jacked up, right? And, I've even seen really good black belts, and sometimes authorities. So this is where argument authority comes in, because if they have this attitude, then it will start to trickle down, and people think like, well, this person's an authority in the community, so who am I to disagree? I'm just going to perpetuate the sentiment about, just roll hard. And again, I've even seen smart, really good teachers, black belts, excellent technicians kind of say, we don't do any of that frou-frou, flights of fancy flow rolling bullshit. We roll hard and that's all we know, and everything like that. And so if it's an either or proposition about rolling hard, which would mean competitively with the inclusion of all of your athleticism, okay, on one pole, right? So that would be one pole. And then on the other pole, we have this watered down, contrived mechanism of flow rolling, where in its extreme, people would be doing rolling where, really they're developing bad habits, because they're actually not creating proper connection in their technique, and they're doing things that they wouldn't normally do under competitive rolling conditions, right? So sort of detraining themselves for what they do in practicality, okay? That's often how it's framed. And what I keep trying to basically, just communicate to everybody is that there is a more productive way. And, this is not a unique thing, but sometimes it's like trying to articulate this and institute it into the training is the challenge. But you've heard this from like Kieran and Henner, Gracie talk about keeping it playful, right? And again, keeping it playful does not mean flow rolling. What it means is that you adopt the ethos of competitive play. And I think the big thing that people miss, because in a lot of cases, even if you're in your 40s, 50s, again, there's sort of this identification with your ability to continue to roll hard, to be able to keep up, to be able to match the younger guys at their pace and things like that. So there's this little bit of a badge of honor, again, attached to that kind of creeps into it. But again, even if you're a great in shape and technical 50-year-old, if you're rolling with physical attributes as being a significant part, even like 30 to 50% significance in your regular rolling protocols, you're missing the boat a bit. And what happens is that's going to catch up to you down the road eventually, even if it hasn't yet. Whereas the whole idea, behind like a keeping it playful type of thing is that you still be competitive. You're not doing a watered down, flim-flammy, this sort of weirdness that goes on with a lot of flow rolling, But when you are actually rolling, you're trying to do it stripped of attributes as much as possible. And by attributes, again, sometimes people get into the weeds on this and overcomplicate it and coming up with all these objections. But essentially, we're talking about if the goal is to be able to have optimal technical effectiveness and efficiency, right? Both, not one or the other, but both. Then you would only ever need to use only enough strength, only enough quickness in a certain moment, only enough explosiveness, right? And really that should be very little. And so anything above the bare minimum, which usually we think, typically around no more than like 10% reliance on that type of thing, 10, 15% max, anything beyond that, and necessarily you're making inroads into your technical development, right? So a lot of times people mistake, pressure for being able to grip hard. People mistake connection for attachment, like how you're holding on to somebody, things like that, right? Whereas connection, means something a bit different. It's essentially about having the maximum effect on the other person's body with the minimum effect of you through your technique. So again, it's like properly construed, it has to do with this sort of matrix of efficiency and effectiveness. So, I've got another video where I talk about the rolling formula and this exercise that we do, in my organization, we call it advanced rolling. It doesn't have to do with what your belt level though, or how many years you've been training. It has to do with, basically having a simple system for being able to know if you're able to train productively with your rolling, assuming you're doing free rolling, not isolated skill development in a particular area, positional sparring with adaptive resistance. We're talking about just rolling and how you be able to have excellent competitive timing-oriented technique, but still be able to study what you're doing, take the pressure off of the win, things like that, and just be able to be present in the moment to make the types of reactions that you would do under competitive circumstances, and actually, working for positional dominance, working for advantage, working for the tap, things like that, but just not being attached to outcomes and taking the attributes out of it such that you're not being, super fixed. And really, following like at the minimum an 80-20 rule. We want this to be 80% of our training time, right? Where we're training in this more playful way. And how do we gauge it? Just to summarize that video, you want to be able to, number one, feel that anytime you're running into too much of a wall where you feel like there's this big fight to accomplish a goal in that moment during your roll, you will find another way. right? You'll be flexible enough mentally and physically with what you're trying to do, that you will let your body problem solve in a different way, as opposed to like try and push your way through a wall. You're going to go find a door, right? And you should be able to, even if you're not in particularly excellent cardiovascular conditioning and things like that, you should be able anytime, even on a longer roll, like 10 minutes or something, have somebody arbitrarily say, okay, time, and you should be able to, even if you're respirating at a higher rate because you're exercising, you should be able to have a conversation without being unable to speak, okay? And then the last piece, again, is sort of on the ethical side, which is not keeping score. So this is a paradox for people, because yes, we need to rely on the external feedback loops that we get from training partners and seeing how we're doing technique for technique in terms of playing the game and how we're evolving, and we have to have an external measure for that. But the thing is that, again, gets all caught up in various nuances of ego and identity and things like that, about, you know, that can be either falsely productive in the long term, or they can, you know, and costly in the long term, or they can really sabotage you in the near term with, like, you know, how did I do with so-and-so? Did a lower belt get the better of me? Things like that, you know, it all play into your performance, because you've got this script running in your mind and all these identifications that you've made with yourself and where you think you should be and where you want to be. And, you know, that can be either positive or negative, but even when it's positive, it can be negative, because again, it's a, you know, measuring on an ego level. So you build up this thing about how many people you're winning with, and then as soon as somebody comes in and beats you, then you start self-sabotaging and making excuses and you know, not being honest with your training. So, you know, it goes on and on. There's so many different permutations there. But the main thing is, you know, at least 80% of the time, this should be the dominant mode in which you're rolling. So yes, you're being competitive. No, you're not just flow rolling and doing weird shit, but you have the freedom to fail and succeed in the role. You have the freedom to test and refine in the role. It is not just a tournament every single time. And then you'll get this objection sometimes about, you know, well, how you play in the tournament, you know, or how you play in practice is how you play in the game. So, you know, if you're doing that in rolling, then what about, you know, how you approach it in, you know, if you are looking to compete? Well, you know, that's why we do have comp team classes where you'll have your A game, and certainly ratcheting up to a tournament, you know, you can use whatever physical attributes you have. If you are explosive, you are super quick, you can use those. If you are, you know, ridiculously Gumby flexible, and you can, you know, have your foot kind of come in by your ear and get in between you and your partner, you know, that's an advantage for you, of course. If you're in a tournament and in a situation where you need to get your guard back when you're late and pull something out, right? Sure. But the thing is, you don't want to rely on these things. You don't want them to be the crutch upon which your technical development ultimately rests. Because again, once these attributes fail, you know, then you'll be really living the glory days, and you'll be so jacked up physically from inflammation, overtraining, injuries, and things like that that come from, you know, use of these attributes, that you simply won't be the same athlete, you know, as you age. And the thing is, none of us will be the same athlete in terms of our physical capacity at some point, but we should be able to continue to improve with our technique and our timing. So we don't need to start having this conversation about like handicap belts and things like that moving forward, right? So it's actually unnecessary. It's not always apples to apples, right? It's a lot of times, you know, just playing the game a little bit differently, but your foundation has been set and been so repeatable over the years by developing great positioning, sensitivity, timing, you know, connection, things like that, that you can continue to play the game even if you can't play it at the same output, but you can play it technically at that level and actually for most of your life be able to continue to improve, and even in your later years where you can't do things that you would have been able to do 20, 30 years ago. So hopefully that helps. And try not to get caught up in this false dichotomy between rolling hard and rolling unrealistically soft, right? You want to roll realistically, competitively, most of the time, stripped as much as possible of reliance on attributes and with the freedom to fail. And what happens is you become much more adaptable and much less fixed. And you can always have that other 20% of the time where you really, come in with a trusted training partner or training partners. You feel good. You want to test yourself. You want to really be competitive. And you might ratchet up your ability to bring in, that extra maybe 5% margin with the physical attributes, but you're not relying on those. Okay, yeah, for most of the time, right? You're keeping it playful and you're being as productive as possible because we only have so many units of time. That's one thing that's even for all of us. So the more of that you spend grinding yourself down in your training, and then having the cost of not only the long-term things that you don't see because it's so infinitesimal on any given day, but like the over-reliance on attributes, but also just, again, long-term effects of inflammation, of injuries, of overtraining, which will make inroads into your recovery time, which will then show up technically in terms of mental fog and clarity, lack of clarity, and just generally how you feel, and create this vicious feedback loop. You want that to be a positive feedback loop. And the last thing I'll say is, because it's such a sister conversation between training intensity and, which again goes into the train hard, just go hard type of thing, go hard or go home mentality, right? A lot of times people are just talking about this almost like it's in its own silo to recovery, inflammation, and injuries. And so they tend to ask the wrong questions, like, again, it's part of the conversation. Like, what, my joints are constantly on fire. What do you recommend for joint supplements? What's your pre or post workout shake that you do, or, mixture or some supplement, things like that. It's like, what about your sleep? Okay. Which most people are just thinking in terms of, subjectively, like, did I get a good night's sleep? How do I feel right now? But there's technology out there now, like wearable technology, which can actually monitor like all these different multivariant factors of your sleep quality, which can defy what you actually feel for your readiness and your recovery. It can defy what you feel subjectively, right? It's because it's actually empirical data. And a lot of times people like just completely walk through things like that. Say, what's the best thing for recovery? Well, it's like there can be multiple facets to that, of course, but one of them is just, how quality is your sleep? Because not everybody's the same. People actually literally, biologically, physiologically will have different recovery times. So when you start factoring in how you're training, how efficiently you're training, mental stresses, work, sleep quality, recovery time, everything like that, right? You get a much different picture. So let's try and get out of the gutter, the mental gutter of just having this go hard or go home. I mean, there's no way, two ways about it, right? You can't be wishy-washy and want to do jiu-jitsu long-term because you're going to be very uncomfortable a lot of times, right? You have to be a little bit hard. As my friend Chris Connolly says, you got to be hard as woodpecker lips, but that's not in a reductive jock way. Like there's way too many 55-year-old fucking jock meathead mentalities out there. And we need to think like, yeah, I'm going to be uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm going to have to train through some pain and things like that. But I also want to be smart because the one instrument I have, the only one I have, is my body, and including, with that is your brain, your mind. And those are my assets that I have to bring to the table if I want to have long-term enjoyability and success in this amazing art. So we want to approach it a little bit smarter, not get caught up in all these false dichotomies. Okay, hope that helps.